Hello, everyone. I'm David Lane from Rent-A-Center. I'm going to talk a little bit about our history at Rent-A-Center and kind of how we got here. Specifically, a lot of it's around tool selection, but a little over 3 years ago, we started a journey to create a strategic sourcing group, bringing in tools and processes along that path. So if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you a little bit about who we are and what tools we did. Ultimately, I'll give you some of the considerations that we may or may not have given consideration to in looking at cloud-based solutions. I will tell you, we do have 2 cloud-based solutions for source to contract and P2P. So a little bit about Rent-A-Center. We're based in Dallas, Texas, a little over 20,000 employees. Effectively, we have 20,000 buyers and a little over 4,000 locations, just north of $3 billion. We operate under a number of brands. We have a new line of business that's a store inside of a store, where we're inside Ashley's Furniture, Rooms to Go, those type of locations. So we support a number of different locations that from a store supplies and office supplies, et cetera. So a little bit about our approach and what we did, and this talks a little bit about our assessment of coming together with, coming up with an approach. And so I will tell you, we did engage Deloitte back in late 2009, and they did help facilitate some of this. I joined the company in May 2010. At the same time, we were just finalizing our tool selection. So this took place a little over a 6-month period of time. But we did an as-is assessment. I'll talk to you a little bit about that, show you some more details. Put together a strategy, got alignment at the C-suite level for looking at different tools to help us with delivering value. Put together some ROI scenarios, and ultimately went through a selection process. And again, I'll spend some more time at the latter part of the presentation on things we did consider, things I would give you guys suggestions to give thought to if you already haven't. And then really, I'll talk a little bit about our implementation approach. So a little bit about where we were. Again, we spend on the indirect side a little more than $600 million, or we're spending more than $600 million. Almost 30,000 active suppliers in a given year, supporting those locations. Very, very little of that was concentrated. Very, very long tail, extremely long tail. And we had a lot of challenges with our procurement. So similar to the previous presentation, lack of adoption, a lot of working around the system. So again, 20,000 buyers, effectively everyone at our store could buy products or buy services. So our challenge was trying to make it as easy as possible. So that was a key thing as we looked at our requirements, and we didn't have a lot of requirements. We had nothing on source to contract, so we were greenfield. So somewhat easy to do in looking at evaluating tools, whether they're cloud-based or hosted. A lot of, over 1 million non-PO, non-backed invoices a year. So pretty much all over the board as far as it goes, and again, just tons of risk. We didn't have commercial terms, didn't have any repository of contracts. When we did do an assessment of our contracts, we identified around 60 contracts. So certainly didn't have a lot of control of the spend. So again, a lot of opportunities, lots of low-hanging fruit. So from that perspective, we did put together kind of a business case, as I noted about from a technology perspective. Go back, should be one more. Maybe not. Can you advance it backwards? Here, hold on, let's see if we get it here. All right, so we put the business case together. Again, there was nothing in place from a source to and contracting, so that was greenfield. From an e-procurement, we certainly knew we didn't like what we had, and on a T&E side, we had nothing. We were literally using Excel. So from a technology scope perspective, that's how we divvied it up. And I'm missing part of that slide. So but effectively, what I can tell you is we broke it up into those components, 3 components, looking at T&E separately. That was a quick fix. Again, just implementing, we brought in Concur for that. So from our selection process, and I'll put it all up here so you guys can look at it. I won't talk to the finer points. Deloitte helped with this selection process. Again, very limited requirements. We did have requirements on the P2P side. We did not have requirements effectively on the source to contract, but we were looking for an end-to-end solution. So we went through the research, looked at effectively down selected to 11 suppliers, did the RFP, and effectively from that standpoint, it was the typical Oracle Ariba's. We actually did eliminate mTORus from that selection process. Coupa was never in that selection process. mTORus went out and got Coupa because they didn't have the P2P side. So we were their first customer that they had integrated. And the unique thing here, and it's got its own challenges, but we have two web-based suppliers that are talking to each other. The other thing that I'll just note to you here, and because I know I don't have it in the back, the vendor master. That's going to come back into play because again, it's back to integration. Where do you put that? So when you talk about, you're hosting this in the cloud, well, at some point somebody's got to own a piece of that equation, whether that's sitting in your ERP or it's sitting in your procure-to-pay component. And anytime, if you guys have questions, I'm going to again try to get through a number of these materials pretty quickly and try to get a little bit back to more of the drivers as far as an assessment at looking at cloud-based versus hosted, and ultimately if they, from our opinion, do they bring more value. So as we went through this, again, we were going through a major transformation as a company. From an executive level, we made the investment to look at strategic sourcing and bring it in. So we went through a couple wave scenarios with wave 1 and 2, having Deloitte lead that. At the same time, we started building a sourcing team, as well as going through the selection process. So as you can see in the bottom, we put in T&E right away back in Q1 of 2010, and then we implemented source to contract and procure to pay. Ultimately, we had to have all those talk there. All three of those are web-based systems. So it was more an integration at that level, respectfully. I also put on there, again, talking about the value, and I'll give a lot of the value to my team on the sourcing side. You can see that how many categories we source, the amount of savings that we identified through that process. Double digit, really effectively, those first couple years. We've had some degradation in that percent, but obviously a little bit more challenging categories. And then this year we've expanded the team, utilizing the different tool sets that we've put in place. So this is what our landscape looks like today and how it all talks. So on the P2P side, we noted Coupa's there, source of contract is mTORus. We have Lawson's our legacy ERP system, and then we have a P-card program, and so that all comes back together. We do use mTORus's IBM solution for the spend analytics, and I think that's been a big part of, at least from my perspective, setting that strategy and helping us deliver the value ultimately. We had to know where to go. And so we are trying to focus on the 80-20 type of rule as far as what categories we evaluate, what does that methodology look like. So effectively, we put together an end-to-end solution. I'll point out to you guys, and it's similar to, again, the last presentation, we didn't actually have the target on the front end, which is what did we want to enable? So we have a challenge with the locations, having a lot of local suppliers, a lot of services that are not national-based or regional. They're very localized. How do we enable that at the same time going through this transformation? Today, where we're looking to target is that 60 to 70% as far as either being contracted or PO-based. Today, I can tell you we're only about 25% PO-based. So we have a long ways to go. There's going to be a large percentage because of our service contracts that we're a direct import into our ERP. Fuel, as an example, we spend $35 million. We don't put that through Coupa. We don't put it in our procure-to-pay. It's got its own program set up for that. So as you start taking the spend, that's 5% just right off the top. So the way we're structured, just to give you some visibility to that, and it talks a little bit about our scorecards and what our responsibilities include, but the way we structured our organization was setting up a P2P. So we already had an AP department, we had an expense management department that was handling our travel. We did set up the source of contract, and that's the side of the organization that I manage. And so what we put together is the metrics, and so we do have monthly report outs and KPIs, and then we've been able to enable supplier relationship management. We certainly have contract management. Now we're north of 300 contracts in in the last 3 years, and we actually have NDAs. We have over 300 NDAs, so that's so we have about 600 active agreements in our system. So a long ways away from the 65 that we couldn't find really when we got started. And I will tell you, most of those are net new. They're not, we found them. They're just new contracts. So the team has been very diligent over the last 3 years putting this together. And again, utilizing the tools that we do have. So this is the methodology. I'll go through this pretty quick. We adopted Deloitte's model, which is a 6-step versus your ATK 7-step. But we go through the same gates and the same type of structure. And again, we're pushing hard again. This is about keeping our sustainability. We are not about RFPs. RFPs is just a component of the process for us. Very much driving to continuous tracking of that category even after it's sourced, keeping track of the suppliers, enabling supplier relationship management. We didn't do that as a whole. It just didn't exist across our departments. Very ad hoc based, if at that. But we've got governance models in place. We have a great tracking model. It is Excel driven, but effectively we've been able to deploy this. And I will show you if we have time at the end, just kind of the results, because not only have we taken the cost down, we've been able to sustain it over the last couple of years while we've grown our business fairly significantly. We went from a $2.8 billion company in 2010 to now we're going to be north of 3.3 this year. So this is a little bit how the tools impacted our business. We kind of took out the numbers in between, but I'll let you do the math. Effectively, we started with 55 people in the organization back in Q1 of 2010. We're down to 45. Actually, I got to take it back. We're up a couple. We've added 2 more headcount within the sourcing organization. So now the sourcing organization has a total of 11. And we've been taking, the big block is our AP department, and they went down almost 20 headcount. And we're working on some efficiencies there with some other technology to reduce that even further. The expense management has stayed steady, respectfully, but as you can see, as we implemented the technology in 2010, as that decline went in and as we matured as an organization. So this is kind of what we think are some of the contributing factors. The biggest one that I would put up there is that we had executive buy-in. Our CEO, COO, and CFO were very much critical to the process. I will say that, and again, I'm somewhat selfish in saying it, the tools enabled it. They didn't do it. At the end of the day, software doesn't solve the problem. It only allows you that process. We were very fortunate. We were a greenfield on the sourcing side, so we could adopt whatever process we wanted. And so when we went through a selection process, in some fairness, unlike as you get larger in a larger enterprise, you run into more constraints. We didn't have very many, we had no constraints. We got to optimize and use the tools to their best capability. And I'll talk a little bit about this as far as selecting a SaaS-based solution versus a hosted, but having IT and security in there was critical. We have PII data. We have a lot of data moving, if you recall on that slide. We're moving it on secure FTP sites, but we have a lot of P-card data. We do have social security numbers that have to be, I'll think of a word here in a second, but not shown. Again, just trying to keep information from being public. But really, with Deloitte's help on the first one, they helped define the project, and we've been executing to it. It has been all internal resources since May of 2010. Really, from my side, we couldn't get them out quick enough, and we've been able to have the ability to continue to grow the business. But really having security and IT and audit being there, they were enablers to the whole process. They all were about getting contracts in place and making sure that our information was protected. The master data elements, again, when you go through this, we came up with our own category structure. That was another big lesson learned. Early on, we developed our own taxonomy that aligned with our stakeholders and aligned with the industry. And so, again, that's one of those decisions in doing that. Whether it's a SaaS solution or not, to me, it was still a key thing of being able to identify your spend. So, again, we've categorized all but like 3% of our spend. So each month I got a report that comes out that tells us where all of our money's going. So we're very fortunate. Then really the challenge is how do you go address it? But as a whole, we've been able to address it. And so from that perspective, we're very fortunate that we have tools that help us show that from that standpoint. And again, the adoption from the field. So similar to the prior presentation, we killed the legacy tool. They had nothing else. If they want that good, go here. The beauty of Coupa, and that was probably it was a differentiator between selecting over an Ariba or Oracle usability. We have high school educated coworkers in the field. They are not going into SAP. It's never going to happen. It won't work. So the UI was just so user friendly for us. So, again, part of the challenge though is that left us with only a host or a SaaS-based solution. So we, at some level, you narrowed it down. And then again, in the last point there, really just establish your KPIs. The one number I showed you guys earlier, we didn't have a target. I think it would have been beneficial to have it because you'll see in a minute, we've had tremendous success as a company. And again, the tools have enabled that process. We did do a lot of due diligence in selecting the tools. We didn't go visit anybody's site, but we certainly looked at a lot of customer environments. We asked them to pull it up. We wanted to see how they were using it. And I think that would be the same whether it's a hosted solution or not. So I wanted to give some thoughts as it relates to what the topic really is. And so as far as selecting cloud and so forth, so we as a company had already made the decision we're going to invest in tools. I would argue there was very little due diligence as it relates to what was that cost going to look like. The one thing I can tell you is we've continued to buy software on behalf of the business, whether it's a SaaS or a internally hosted solution. I'm going to tell you it's OpEx and CapEx. It's the biggest thing that we see, and we see the business continuing to steer towards SaaS solutions primarily because of financials. They have to go get approval for CapEx. They don't need to necessarily get approval if they can work it within their budget. So it's a piece I think that brings into play. But the one thing that we do see, whether it's sourcing tools for SaaS solutions or hosted, the one thing that I will say that we've struggled with is, do you really benefit on the headcount side? And what I mean by that is you still have to operate the system. You still need a system admin. I may not need a DBA in the background, but that DBA is also managing 25 other servers or 50 servers. So am I really changing that headcount? So those are things that if you're really looking at the cost attributes, to dig into that deep. Certainly you have to buy the hardware. There's a time to market, and that is my next bullet. When we signed the contracts, the systems were up that same day. That's how they get RevRec. So there's no secret to it, but we had to enable it. With the sourcing tools, we signed them on June 30th. The systems were active and ready to use the first week of August, and that's after us spending a week in Boston doing UAT and training. Very quick, has our colors, all of our logos, and set up and configured the way we wanted. But again, we were greenfield, so I gotta note that the configuration is much easier when you're not trying to work around old processes. But I doubt if we had bought a hosted solution, we would have had it up and running, just knowing our IT staff. It might have took them a little bit longer to procure a server if it needed a dedicated server, and I would doubt that it did. Getting web addresses, so we have public web addresses that we have to buy and maintain relative to our solutions. But the integration does come to be a critical thing. So if you recall, we have a full 360 as far as the data loop. And I will say the web solutions, it causes another challenge. There's no doubt about it. I'm fighting one right now. We got finger pointing. It's their passwords. It's their gateway. And it can be a little bit of a challenge. Certainly I would love to have it inside our firewall and we don't have to worry about sending data. It would take away some security attributes. But on the flip side, I can tell you on the spin, our spin analytics tool, what they do on their enrichment process, and we have it's a business objects interface. We can look at $10 billion. We have all a legacy spin back to 2009. You can sort it any which way you want. It's however you set up the dimensions. On the prior slide, I talked about knowing your data. You can't do this if you don't know your data. And I will tell you that Deloitte led part of that process. We had to unwind it, and it took us almost a year to unwind it. So again, make sure you have the right partners integrating that also know it. And so we did major change management with multiple SaaS solutions in a very short period of time, and we stretched our resources probably too thin. And at some point we leaned on third parties that ultimately may or may not have known our information for such a large transformation. The one thing that I'll put on here that, again, one of the challenges with a SaaS solution that you don't have to worry about if it's internally hosted, what about the end? What about your data? So we did 5-year contracts. We're 3 years in. 2 years from now, what are we going to do? I've got to think about how we're going to actually extract that information. I can tell you at least a few years ago, the suppliers we were dealing with, they don't have that in the agreements. We didn't contemplate it. So it's another variable. You can get it up and running, but you got to think about the full life cycle as it relates to it. Something we definitely didn't give enough consideration or thought to. And I put it in here, we as a company are, certainly from a procurement standpoint, we're buying anywhere from 5 to 10 new applications a year on behalf of HR, marketing, IT, name your department. Do we actually have a strategy? And so it goes beyond just our procurement tools and resources. And this is something we're trying to figure out how to develop. But there's certainly, back to the TCO model, is it an enterprise-based system? How many users? Single sign-on is a challenge for us. We have a very legacy LDAP system. Samuel is a very common. We don't have that. It integrates very quickly with SaaS solutions. It doesn't with our LDAP. It's custom code that had to be written, not the preferred methodology. You have to do that if you have a SaaS solution. So again, some of the trade-offs, but ultimately I will say this, the suppliers we selected, they've bent over backwards to help get them integrated. We had Coupa up and running in October. We did 3 phases because our business does not believe in Big Bang anymore. We don't push out one application to 20,000 people and that many businesses. That could disrupt our operations. We did it in three different phases, one each week. No issues. The training was so simple. Just a couple-minute videos that we created ourselves, and we put it through our LMS system to deliver to our users. But that was kind of a bigger challenge for us because when you're touching 20,000 people, and we trained them all in 3 weeks. And we did it all remotely. We never traveled. We didn't do any of that. And I don't think it was ever needed, respectfully. But those are some of the thoughts as it at least relates to things we probably should have given consideration to. Again, this was such a fast-moving process in light of we had no sourcing people, and we really did make some major changes in the procurement side. I do want to show you I just grabbed these. Sorry for the formatting, but I did want to kind of give you what we've seen as far as results. So on the indirect spend that we're responsible for, at one point it peaked almost at $650 million. Again, we've grown our business. We went from 3,000 locations up to 4,000. We've added a couple thousand employees during this process. We hire about 11,000 people a year. But it takes a while to see the savings be realized, right? We saw that yesterday. It's not just identifying the savings, it's actually seeing it. Well, this is proof in the pudding. We got to actually see it come down. We kind of leveled off. I'm very keen about keeping that pipeline full and keep identifying additional value to deliver to the business. My CFO cares about this. That's what he wants to see it hit the bottom line, and we've seen it hit the bottom line. So our little team of now 11 has done just a fantastic job. It's, to me, the tools have enabled it. The people have done it. Our DPO, we took a focus to that back in the beginning of 2011. Once we did have Coupa in place, Coupa was just a piece of it because, again, a lot of our spend is going outside of Coupa directly into loss in our ERP. But we've seen just dramatic improvement there. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's worth in the neighborhood of about $40 or $50 million of cash flow as it relates to improving our DPO, and that's really just paying to terms. So same issue. We had locations sending in invoices late, past due. We paid late fees, but we had no way to quantify it. The baseline was not really quantifiable. We used Spend Radar. That didn't work so well. That was what Deloitte used. It was pretty easy to adopt the spend management tool within mTORus. All right, so I spoke a lot. I didn't allow you time to talk or ask questions. Is there any questions? And I'll go back a slide as well.
So David, a couple of questions, and this may be for Hiram too. First of all, did you, for you specifically, did Deloitte have any impact on you getting up and running that quickly? I mean, can you attribute any to the fact that you brought in a third party to help you get there? Or was that truly just the way that you structured it and were able to set up the system that quickly?
I would say Deloitte had little impact with the system side. They did partake in it. We used Intoris, we used Coupa. They were pretty integral. It was their first time integrating, so they both actually talked for the first time. Deloitte really didn't play part of that. Like I said, as it specifically talks to the spend data, it was a nightmare. I mean, we literally dealt with it until this year. It was a 2-year problem unwinding what was done. And I don't want to pick on Deloitte, but it was a problem for us. But they set the foundation for sourcing. They proved sourcing's value. Certainly, most of the people probably in this room all know sourcing's value. They proved it with a mass, doing 20 categories in 5 months it's surreal. But they left us with contracts to go do and execute and implement. So I don't know if I would wish that on any of y'all, but certainly from a change management and education, they did a great job.
Can you talk a little bit, and this is probably to Hiram too, a little bit about the actual experience of the people interacting with the system? And, you know, there's probably hesitancy at the beginning, but was their ease of use impacted?
So I'll take a first part. I'll talk about sourcing because it's closer to home for me. We actually tried to eliminate anybody touching it. We wanted it to be in the background. My small team of, at the time, 3 people, we ran it, we engaged it, we did this, we actually tried to make it as simple as possible, scoring RFPs and going through that process as possible. Go further downstream to contracting, the tool has every capability that you can ever imagine. It's a Cadillac by all means. We were very fortunate to have some really good people from Intoris help set it up, and we were very much trying to crawl, walk, run. The tool enables you to do red lines in the tool. I don't suggest that unless you're mature. We didn't have contracts. We didn't have paper. You're not going to do redlining in a tool. So again, just being realistic, we did do the electronic signature. We have a delegation of authority challenge, if you will. All of our stakeholders sign contracts at a VP level and above. We thought it would be really great to have them. I thought it would be great, I'll admit it, to have them sign it up through. Now I have this chain of approval. We added steps to the process. It was not well received. They got in the tool, and Intoris even noted it wasn't easy for them to figure out what button to push to hit approve. By the way, they've already signed the contract. So again, having come from like EDS where it's global and you need approvals from EMEA and AP, we don't need that. We're all in North America. So again, it's partially our environment, it's partially our legacy of our culture, but we actually try to keep people out. As it relates to Coupa, we needed everybody to use it. It's not used in our corporate office very much, just because there's not that many purchases. Our purchasers are in the field. But the adoption, it was just welcomed across the board.
And I guess the one thing that some of these SaaS providers discuss and kind of advocate is the fact that your dependency for changes to the system and system support reside within your organization instead of IT. Do you see any benefit for that? I mean, you mentioned, you touched on it a little bit about the database, but really, how simple is system administrative of these SaaS-based versus, somebody that might already have one where we have to go to IT for any changes?
So on the sourcing side, we've done one upgrade. There was no impact to us. So there would have been a requirement on IT with us doing some UAT respectfully. We didn't even do UAT. So they did it for us. So that was something to consider if you build it into your contracts. Make sure you put who's going to do the UAT. Certainly you might want to actually go in and validate it yourself. So that's a benefit. I will tell you, and it's a note I actually made on my own copy here. We haven't had this, so we're retail. We have a lot of old hardware, 10-year-old thin clients. Guess what? We haven't had the issue with Coupa. We've had it with other suppliers. We've had it with Taleo. You can't run their application on it. Internet Explorer compatibility. We only go up to 8 in our company. We're very behind the times. But I can tell you in the retail world, we're not. We're right with everybody else. You lose some of that flexibility of not upgrading. I would prefer not upgrading at times. Right now, I can tell you they've got some really neat features in the new mTaurus IBM version. We're not going to take advantage of them. Why would I even bother? Now, but that's a challenge with a hosted solution, right? You got to go through that process. It's going to take some resources. We don't have to worry about that. Coupa does the upgrades whether we want them to or not. So that's something to give consideration to. Some SaaS suppliers, you have some control over that. We do have that control with a lot of other SaaS suppliers that we utilize. So it's something to give consideration to. But compatibility to your legacy hardware and Explorer browsers, it's a big deal.
Can you speak a little bit to the implementation process comparing a SaaS supplier versus a cloud solution?
So I can't speak to it on the sourcing tools. All my companies I've had, we've already had them. And again, when we brought them in here, I can tell you we buy software all the time. A lot of it goes back to, do you have a project management group? How disciplined are they on change management? I will tell you as a general rule, and we're trying to, again, I told you we're going to try to build it out as far as a process. But if it's an enterprise application and you got users logging in and you're going to use this for more than a few years, I would definitely give a lot of consideration to internally hosted. But it goes back to what's your appetite for upgrades and so forth. I don't see us needing upgrades often. But, Coupa's coming out with the latest and greatest all the time, but they're catching up too. The good news about software today, it's very configurable. You go back a decade or 15 years ago, it was very customized. Software has changed from my point of view. So that's changing a little bit of that, and so I think they can make those improvements. But Coupa's maturing. They're not where Ariba is at or Oracle. They don't have some of that functionality today. They've made tremendous progress in just the 3 years that we've been with them. But there's resources to the question and to your question. There's resources it takes to manage it. But from a system admin, we still have to do all the same work about adding users and changing permissions. And it's the DBA side that you get to benefit. And I would argue that there's not that much effort. They're going to tell you there's a lot. Our director of IT for infrastructure does not want to host any more solutions because he actually gets a call if it goes down. He doesn't when it's a SaaS solution. He picks up the phone and says, call IBM. Selfish, I think, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar place as far as implementing a new system and replacing an old P2P system. I think you said you cut yours off and went live with the new one just like you did. So any lessons learned about that transition from the old P2P system and going to the new one? The timing, is it midnight? You just throw out the old one, put in the new one? Is it?
We did it on midnight on Saturday. Most of our locations are closed on Sunday, so that was a little bit of a benefit for us. But we did it, so when they came in on Monday, we changed the URL location. They didn't get to see the old one anymore. We literally cut it off. And when they went to go to, so we did it all through our internet. They click on this. We called it the same thing. It's just our procurement system, but now they get a different screen. I would say this was and Deloitte came up with this idea, and it was great. We did prizes for the district or the region that got all their training done first, where you had 100%. That was brilliant.
The what?
We gave them prizes for getting their training done. Okay. So we're in the business. We rent TVs and washers and dryers. We just give out TVs. So it was easy. We just went to our suppliers to give us some TVs, yeah. and it was a brilliant idea as far as getting training. The training, I think, we heard that we overdid it. We gave them, I think, about 7 minutes of total training and 2 different modules. They said that was too much.
Wow. So how far in advance did you do that? And what did you do with your live POs that were in the old system?
So with that followed through. And so on that end, great question. They had to be approved in the system. And so there is that period of time where a few days where we'd actually go in and let different levels of leadership make the approvals as necessary. But so we didn't kill them. And so there was that cycle through. and we did not transfer them over. And so we just did a cut over. At that point, any new POs are over here. They didn't have access to it, and then we just approved them automatically. It was a risk that we took.
Yeah.
That,
So how long did you have to leave the old one up to get all the approvals done and get them paid? So did you do the matching in the old system?
We did. So again, we at the corporate side had full visibility. The field lost visibility, so we eliminated their acceptance, but we took that as a risk that we were willing to take in light of them having to deal with it. It's a great question. So we did take that risk on, that we were going to accept them in the system irrespective, once it was approved. So there's a chance that, Staples didn't deliver the box of paper. We took that risk and said, we're just going to accept that PO after several days.
Okay, so but you did still match invoices?
We did, yes.
With the old
Yes,
PO?
we did. So we still went through the throughway match, but we just did not allow them access into the system to accept the PO. Does that make
Okay,
sense? So we
yeah.
forced the acceptance at a corporate level. And then, and again, it was a calculated risk. I mean, we don't have a real issue with that as a company. We weren't doing that many POs though either. So we were doing very little POs. It was truly only our office and store supplies. And so what we've been trying to do is build that catalog since then.
Okay.
That's a good question as far as transition.
We can do one more question.
Hey, David, on the spin cube that you guys had built, was that, as far as the taxonomy that was used, was that leveraged from a third-party perspective, or did you guys kind of build your own, or a little combination of both?
We built our own. It was
Okay.
ground up. Just prior knowledge. I was very fortunate. I have a team member that was from IBM, Eli Lilly, Blockbuster. So I brought in some people that had some working knowledge of categories, and we just built it up. I would say that that's the one thing I'm glad we invested in, and it was a smart decision. The vendor master was another critical decision that we had to make. Where are you going to host it? Because you can have that in Coupa, you could have it in Taurus, you could have it in our ERP, and that's ultimately where we let it reside. But the taxonomy and that were big decisions to make. But we've refined we have actually 160 categories that we source. So that was kind of a key to us, is trying to figure out what does that life cycle look like? What's that sourcing frequency? What's the spend? And so forth. So that, to me, was a big deal, is to be able to ultimately, when the data comes back and we see the category spend, what's it look like?
David, one more quick question. The SaaS providers that were profess that they integrate to Oracle and SAP better than SAP and Oracle. Did you find that to be the case?
So we didn't have Oracle or SAP. We had Lawson, and we did challenge them on their routines. I believe they were actually there. I would challenge you, and because we buy other software, whether it's in the Oracle house for our inventory management. I think the integrations with the APIs, the way they're structured today, it is that easy. I really do. I think it's you're going to build a few more hours into the process. I think it's manageable. I think they do have it. Again, it goes back to how do you set up your data, and I can tell you it's much more on your side of the house of how you structure your data sets than anything. You got to decode that for them. It's a good question. I will tell you, we took a big gamble putting mTaurus and Coupa together, and they talk. We actually, the contract data sends down to Coupa. It theoretically should build a catalog if we were to do the line items. We haven't done that. I mean, our sourcing process has been not as much price-driven as it's been demand and spec-driven. That's where our values come from. Again, the tools, they help us gather a lot of market information from an RFP perspective, but I give the kudos to the team of thinking outside the box. That's where we're getting our value. The tools are enabling it, and we're fortunate that we have the company invested in it to do it. We didn't have to fight for it. It's been really a great organization from that standpoint to work for.
Great. Thanks, David.